Good evening, Johnson County Dems and Free Staters all. Hello, Kansas. What a treat. What a treat. What a treat to be back home and be with all of you. These are hard events when you're with the people you love, when you're back in your hometown. It could easily be the 3-hour speech. Don't worry, it's just going to be 2 hours. But my heart is really full because of the people in this room. So let me just do some thank yous. First, to all the electeds and all the candidates. It's hard to run for office these days. Wow, it is a tough, tough line of work. I think the difference between somebody who's never run for office and somebody who's run for town council is bigger than the difference between somebody who's run for town council and somebody who's run for president. Crossing that Rubicon to put your name out there and court rejection in 50% of the cases, and know that you're going to be with a lot of the public that thinks badly about people in politics, and you will make a mistake because you're human. It is a hard thing to do. So to everybody here who has run or is running, just give them a big round of applause and some encouragement. It's so important. To my friend Kathleen and I joke about this. I'm going to talk about my folks in a minute. My folks are, when I grew up, just kind of the traditional Kansas moderate Republican, a very disappearing breed. And they had a son who got into politics in Virginia. I'm in Virginia because my wife's a better negotiator than I am. 33 years ago, we were each trying to convince each other, and I lost and have continued to lose. But my wife, Ann, of 33 years. I was running for office. I ran for city council and mayor, nonpartisan offices in Richmond, and was elected. And I ran for lieutenant governor as a Democrat and won. Then I ran for governor as a Democrat and won. And when I was inaugurated as governor, they took the inauguration from Richmond, the state capital, and they took it back to Williamsburg. I was the first Virginia governor inaugurated in Williamsburg since Thomas Jefferson. And I said to my parents, so what do you think? You like me now? And my folks said, you know what, we're thinking about switching from Republican to independent. I got them halfway to Democrat. It was Kathleen Sebelius who got them 100% over to Democrat. And if anybody wants to really know the reason I got to be governor of Virginia, was because I was smart enough to realize if I stayed in Kansas, I wouldn't lose a race to Kathleen Sebelius. So that's why I moved to Virginia. Kathleen, you are a great friend. And let's be honest, millions of Americans have health insurance because of Kathleen Sebelius, and tens of millions of Americans have better health insurance because of Kathleen Sebelius. That's a keeper, folks. That's a keeper. To Nancy Leiker, the head of the Johnson County Dems, and to all chairs, if you are a party chair, you get to just bypass purgatory, go right to heaven. It's such a Purple Heart job. Thank you. And to all our chairs. To Barry and Missy, what a duo. I have not seen a pair of MC. This is like Bing and Bob, or Thelma and Louise, or Tsar Nicholas and Rasputin. I mean, this is a dynamic duo here. You guys are awesome. Let's give them a round of applause. And then to my mom and dad. My parents, Al and Kathy, they live 2 miles from here, and they're sitting right here at the table with me. My brother, one of my 2 brothers, Pat, and his wife Joanne are right here. My best friend from boyhood, Mark O'Connell, and his wife Lynn are right here. And I've got a lot of friends in the room. It's wonderful. And I'll just begin with, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. This is where I grew up. My parents are from Wamego and El Dorado. They moved to the big city after graduating from Kansas State, St. Paul, Minnesota, and got homesick. And shortly after I was born there, moved back to KC. And my brothers and I all grew up at 99th and Cedar, just a couple miles from here. And I mentioned my parents were, growing up, we weren't a political family. Politics was like pro sports or Hollywood. It was something that other people did. We read newspapers and read the names of people in newspapers. My folks were the kind of moderate Republicans that liked a Bob Dole or a Nancy Kassebaum or a John Danforth. That part of the Republican Party that sadly is just dwindling to the point of disappearance. I was, like most teenagers, I was going to rebel. Some get arrested. Some experiment with activities that are now legal in many states. I decided my youthful rebellion was I was going to be a Democrat. And now it's a middle-aged rebellion, and I'm sticking with it, folks. You know, actually, if I think about what made me a Democrat, and you kind of go back into these experiences, when you grow up, the popular culture and the big experiences when you're growing up make such an impression on you. Your mind is forming. Your views are forming. I walked home from Trailwood Elementary School in November 1963. I was in the morning class. And I walked home, and I walked in, and my mom was in front of the TV crying. I'd never seen my mother cry before. John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. That's this Irish Catholic, which to an Irish Catholic family meant something. When you see your parent cry for the first time, it makes a huge difference. We were not into politics, but we got the Kansas City Times in the morning and the Kansas City Star in the afternoon, and we would get the Times, and it would hit the driveway, and Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and then Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated, and then the Vietnam War, and then a little bit later, Watergate. I'm probably with a lot of you in this room growing up where those things were the confusing to a child and to an adult, things that shaped your identity. I remember going to the Metcalf South Shopping Center. I just drove by it today. I see it's knocked down. I was 14 years old. It was 1972. This is my story about Johnson County Dems. We walked in the back door over near where the Metcalf Theater was. It was my mom and me and my grandmother, Pauline Burns from El Dorado, Kansas. We walked in, and there was a canvasser from the Johnson County Dems handing out McGovern buttons. And I just said, yeah, give me one of those. I'm putting that on right now before we walk into this shopping mall. I put it on. My mom looked at me. She rolled her eyes. And then my grandmother, Pauline, said, give me one of those. I'm putting that button on. While my parents sort of fit at that time within the Kansas norm, my Irish Catholic grandmother, Pauline Burns, she had a line, I'm a Democrat, and I don't mean maybe. That was her line. I then went to high school at Rockhurst. I don't know if we got any Rockhurst grads here, right? Rockhurst High School. If you go to a Jesuit high school or college anywhere in the country, whether it's single-sex or co-ed, it's men for others or people for others. That's the motto. Focus on others. And I just will tell you, my whole political career has been trying to live up to the values that my parents and the Jesuits and my friends and my Kansas City upbringing inculcated in me. It's all been striving to live up to what these people taught me was the right thing to do when I was a teenager. Now, look, we know this. No party has or ever will have a monopoly on vice or virtue. My political hero is my wife's dad, who integrated the public schools of Virginia as a Republican when Democrats had maintained as Dixiecrats segregation. But while no party's got a monopoly on vice or virtue during my life, I think that Democrats are men and women for others. And I have never felt that in my life so strongly as the 7 months between January 3rd and early August, when together with all of you, we fought a pitched battle to keep Republicans from taking health insurance away from 20 million people. And every Democrat in the Congress and in the Senate stood together to make sure they would fail. Every last Democrat stood together. Because we're people for others. Because we're people for others. There's so much I could talk about tonight. I mean, how long do I have? I thought 2016 was going to be the most surreal year of my life, and it turns out 2017 is actually now passing it. I figured what I'd try to do tonight is just talk about three things. I want to talk about Democrats and the economy and jobs, the big issue that everybody's worried about around their table. I want to talk about Democrats and voting. And then I want to talk about what a horrible week I had last week and the meaning of what happened in Charlottesville. Not to Virginia, but the meaning in our moment in this country. Democrats and the economy, Democrats and voting. And what was the meaning of what happened in Charlottesville? Democrats and the economy. There are some who claim, if you look at polls, you see this, that the Republicans are the party for a better economy, and that that's the explanation for what happened in 2016. Well, there's a lot of explanations for what happened in 2016, but let me tell you one thing. The Democrats, over a very long period of time, are the best party to grow the economy of this country. Modern history since about 1900, most of you have seen this, shows that job growth and GDP growth are much stronger under Democratic administrations than they are under Republican administrations. And why is that? And I think it's because we've got a better philosophy than Republicans do about how to grow the economy. What's the Republican philosophy? Cut taxes and regulation. But we know that's not enough to grow a 21st century economy. And if anything proves it, it's the Brownback years when he has been the governor in Kansas. And his unswerving dedication to tax cuts has not led Kansas to thrive. It's led to very anemic job growth numbers. That's not the way Kathleen Sebelius ran this state when she was the governor of Kansas. Democrats have got a better way to grow the economy. Of course, we believed in balanced taxes and regulation, but we know the key to growth is investing in people, investing in better skills for workers, and that means education and apprenticeships and innovation and, yes, immigration. Investing in better jobs through investments in infrastructure, but also making sure that people have good jobs where there's health care and child care and the kinds of things that enable people to go to work and be productive. And finally, promoting strong wages, whether it's a minimum wage that gets you above the poverty level or pay equity for women. Democrats believe in growing the economy, better skills, better jobs, better wages. And I'll tell you, that beats less taxes and less regulation every time. And we shouldn't be bashful about bragging that Democrats know more than the R's do. This has been the Democratic plan in Virginia. We're pro-growth progressives, and it works. I was born in 1958. I turned 60 in February. Since 1958, no state, not one, has improved their economic hand more than Virginia. It was 36th in per capita income when I was born, and it's 12th today. Not one state has improved as significantly as Virginia has under a smart strategy, a Democratic strategy. 3 of the last 4 governors have been Democrats, and we're going to win the governorship this November, too, so it'll be 4 out of 5. We know how to grow the economy. So, oh, and guess what? A good track record for the economy also has helped Democrats politically. When I ran for lieutenant governor in 2001, we were in the wilderness. We had been red in every presidential year since Truman 48, with the sort of freakish exception of LBJ in 64. Every statewide office holder in Virginia was Republican. Overwhelming majorities in our legislative bodies, congressional and state. And that was just in 2001. Today, all 5 statewide office holders in Virginia are Democrats. We've gone blue in 3 presidential elections in a row. We elect Democrats up and down the ballot because we're pro-growth progressives, and we're not ashamed to tell everybody that we know how to manage the economy and create jobs better than Republicans do. So let's be pro-growth progressives. There's a path to victory there in Virginia and Kansas and all around this country. So that's my first point. Second one I want to talk about is Democrats and voting. We're here to celebrate the Johnson County Democratic Party, and you got a lot to celebrate. And this isn't a rearview mirror thing. Celebrate the past, but you got a lot to feel good about in terms of what's coming up. You have more Democrats here in Johnson County than in any county in Kansas. You were the reason, you led the way when Kansas added more Democratic seats to its state legislature in 2016 than any other state in the country, and it was Johnson County Democrats who were leading the way. And if it's going to happen in 2018, if you're going to win more legislative seats, if you're going to put a governor in who follows the right path to growing the economy and the right path to protecting our values, not the wrong path, it's going to be Johnson County Democrats who will do it. So there's a lot of reason to feel good, but it will only happen if we vote, if we encourage others to vote, and if we encourage people to run. And I want to talk about Democrats and voting right now because we've got a burden on our shoulders, and the burden is simply this: to save, defend, and promote participatory democracy in the United States, it's on the Democratic Party to do it. It's on the Democratic Party to do it. Because both the Democratic and Republican parties have strong historical records of expanding access to voting until the presidency of Barack Obama. There was just something about Barack Obama. When he became president, the Republicans pulled a 180 and a reversal, and a party that was for voting rights since Lincoln became a party that was trying to dramatically restrict voting. And that means that it's only the Democrats now, until the Republicans come to their senses, who are upholding the notion of a participatory democracy in the United States. Let me tell you what I mean by that. And I'm going to give props to the Republicans. After the Civil War, when the post-Civil War amendments were passed, the 15th Amendment, you can't deny somebody the right to vote based on the race. That was a Republican Congress and a Republican president that did it. Republicans were a pro-Voting Rights Act party. When women were given the right to vote, it was a Democratic administration, Woodrow Wilson, but strong Republican support. Once again, expanding access, expanding voting. When the 26th Amendment passed to give the vote to 18-year-olds, it was the Nixon presidency. It was bipartisan, but the Republicans were strong to expand access and expand voting. When the Civil Rights Act passed, the Voting Rights Act in the mid-60s, more Republicans in the Senate supported LBJ's effort to pass the Voting Rights Act than did Democrats. The Republicans were a voting rights party. And when the Voting Rights Act has had to be reauthorized time after time after time, Republicans supported the Voting Rights Act. The Republicans were a voting rights party. But then President Obama got elected. President Obama got elected, and the Supreme Court struck down a key piece of the Voting Rights Act, and even the Republican Party that had voted unanimously to reauthorize it, that had supported its passage, we cannot get not one Republican in the Congress or Senate to sign on and support a fix of the Voting Rights Act. There have been efforts nationally to restrict early voting, to purge voters' rolls, to disenfranchise voters, to fight campaign finance reform, to fight redistricting reform, and all of these efforts have been led by Republicans, and all of these efforts have been opposed by the Democrats. The Republican Party has sold out their history of being a Voting Rights Act party, and they've done a 180, and if we're going to promote voting, it's all on us. It's all on us. And now we have a president who says, including about my state, of course, I actually won the popular vote. False allegations of voter fraud are now stock and trade on the Republican side, and there is no person in this country who has been more responsible for that than Kansan Chris Kobach. He is the poster child of the Republican Party turning their backs on their history as a party of expanding access to voting. Why are they doing this? Why have they sold out 150 years of history? They've done it because they know that their only path to victory is shrinking voting access, because they are not convinced they can actually win a majority of an engaged, passionate, active voting electorate. So can I put some pressure on you? I lived in a military dictatorship in Honduras where nobody could vote for anything. I happen to believe that participation is not just a responsibility, it's a great gift. It's sacred. And with a Republican Party trying to restrict and carve down voting rights access, I think a key to our country being successful is expanding access, and that, until the Republican Party returns to its senses, it's all on Democrats. The country is counting on us to register, to vote, to encourage, to run. We will not have a participatory democracy if the Democrats don't do this. And that's why we're here, to support local parties and a state party and a federal party, and especially these candidates. Let me just say my last piece, the third thing I want to talk about, Charlottesville. I went to 3 funerals last week, 2 of whom people I knew pretty well. These 3 people were victims of white supremacy, a rally of neo-Nazis, Confederates, KKK members, white supremacists in Charlottesville. 90% of those who came to Charlottesville to do this rally lived outside of Virginia. They brought hatred and bigotry and violence and murder to my state. And they did it because they have a bitter fantasy about the past. In that fantasy, Virginia plays a role in their psychosis. And they hate it when they see a Virginia becoming more progressive, becoming more diverse, going from red to blue. They absolutely hate it. And so they come like moths to a flame. And I saw this when I was the mayor of Richmond, and I saw it when I was the governor of Virginia, to try to stop us from moving forward. I want to tell you about the 3 people who were killed in Charlottesville. Beautiful people, and their stories ought to be told. Heather Heyer was the one that I didn't know. Heather was a 32-year-old paralegal in Charlottesville who, when a white supremacist from out of state gunned his car into a crowd, he killed her and injured 19 other people. Heather grew up in a Republican family in a very rural part of Virginia, north of Charlottesville. Never went to college. Heather was a waitress. Heather saw an ad in a newspaper one day to be a paralegal. And she applied. And she sat down with Alfred, who became her boss, for the job interview. And Alfred eulogized her at her memorial service. Alfred said, "Where'd you go to college?" "I didn't go to college." "What, you're applying for a paralegal job and you didn't go to college? What makes you think you can do this job?" Here's what Heather said. "I'm a waitress, but I listen to people all day. I got the widower who's in for lunch every Wednesday. I got the family with their kids who this is the one place they can afford this place to come out to eat once a week. And all I do is listen to people. And you're a bankruptcy lawyer, and you got a lot of people coming in who are ashamed that they're filing for bankruptcy, and what they need in a paralegal is somebody who can listen to them." And he said, "You know what, I'm going to hire you. I'm going to give you a chance. I don't know if I should or not." And Alfred said within 2 years, Heather was running this office. Her passion, her sense of justice, her listening skills, she could always hand him the file and say, "These guys have a medical problem. These guys were supporting family members who didn't have much, and then they got into a jam because they were trying to help people out." Alfred said one day he and Heather were working late, and because they had to file something the next day, and they left the office at 8:30. Heather's boyfriend was sitting outside, and Alfred met him for the first time. They had a nice visit, and Heather and her boyfriend went off for a date. And the next day he came into work, and Heather was not in a good mood. And he waited till the end of the day, and he said, "Heather, what's up? You don't seem like yourself." "I broke up with my boyfriend last night." "He seemed like a good guy. Why'd you break up with him?" "Well, after he met you, he said, 'You didn't tell me you worked for a black guy.'" Heather said, "Well, why would I tell you that? Well, what does that matter that my boss, the attorney who hired me when I was a paralegal, when nobody else would. Why should I have told you? What difference did that make? Well, it makes a big difference to me. You didn't tell me you were working for a black guy. And so Heather, that night, broke up with her boyfriend. That's who this white supremacist ran his car into. Somebody who just believes that people are people. And what difference does it make what color skin my boss is? That was Heather Heyer. Jay Cullen, 2 troopers were assigned special duty on a Saturday. They would have been off, but there was going to be a tough rally, and they were assigned special duty to fly a helicopter, to keep order, to protect people's rights to express themselves, and to film any violence so they could convict anybody who did anything wrong. Jay Cullen was at the helm. There was a mechanical failure. They filmed the violence that's going to enable people to be convicted who need to be convicted. But Jay was the guy who every time I got in a helo when I was governor, pretty much he was flying me. A wonderful pilot, a state police officer, a fanatical road cyclist racer with 2 boys who are 15 and 13 and a beautiful wife. Burke Bates, another trooper who was killed in the helo. I didn't know him as well. Irish Catholic to the bone. He was on Terry McAuliffe's security detail as governor, so I did have the chance to meet him when I was working with Terry. Also, longtime state police officer. When he got a job, finally, he'd wanted to be on the security detail. When he finally got on the gig with the governor, he was so happy, and here's why he was happy. He was Irish Catholic, and so was Terry McAuliffe, and he walked into his supervisor and turned in 15 years of leave requests for St. Patrick's Day on his first day on the Capitol Police. Left behind a beautiful wife, left behind 2 twins that are 11. This is so painful. I was on Face the Nation a couple of days after Charlottesville, and I was asked to be on, and the interviewer asked me, he said, listen, I want to talk to you about statues. And I said to him, well, I'm glad to, because I dealt with a lot of statues when I was mayor and I was governor, but let's be really clear about one thing before we talk about statues. If Charlottesville was about statues, you wouldn't have asked me on the show this week. You've only asked me on the show because I've been to 3 funerals this week. You've only asked me on this show because these 3 people were killed and dozens were hurt when outsiders brought their bigotry and hatred and violence and murder to the state. This isn't about statues, folks. This isn't about symbols. It's about what's acceptable and what is not acceptable. It's about the meaning of what happened in Charlottesville. And we got to grapple with that. I think we are grappling with it in a painful way in Virginia, but I think we ought to grapple with it as a country. I think the meaning is pretty clear. At this particular time, as Virginians or Kansans, as Americans or Democrats, what are we fighting for and what are we fighting against? I didn't say who are we fighting against. I said what are we fighting for and what are we fighting against? What are we fighting for? People like Heather Heyer, who went out to be peaceful protesters against the Klan and the Nazis and others, they were fighting for what Jefferson believed in. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They were fighting, and Jefferson is the founder of the Democratic Party. But they weren't only fighting for a Jeffersonian vision, they were fighting for the vision of the founder of the Republican Party. Can a nation dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal long survive? They were fighting for what the abolitionists believed in when they came to Kansas to make sure that the state entered as a state in the Union that was free rather than a state that accepted slavery. They were fighting for what the exodusters came to Kansas for when they believed that this would be a free state where they would be safe. Our founders weren't perfect, but they did one thing right. They picked equality as the North Star for this country now in its 240-plus year. And every generation in the history of our country has held the current way we live up to that promise and found it wanting. And they found ways where we can make progress and go forward. Ending slavery, giving women the right to vote, protection for dreamers, LGBT equality, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, so that retirees can live with dignity rather than poverty. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Affordable Care Act. Again and again and again, a generation wakes up and says, we said it was about equality, but we're not living that way, so let's try to do something and get closer to it. A sailor never gets to the North Star. You can orient by it. You're not going to reach it, but you got to keep going. You got to keep orienting toward it, and that's who our nation is, and that's what we've done, and that's what Democrats fight for every single day. Just under the... Think about what we've done for this country in the last few years, nominating the first minority to be president, first Latina on the Supreme Court, complete LGBT equality, including marriage equality, protection for dreamers. Women can serve in any MOS in the military, first party to nominate a woman to be president again and again and again. It's the Democrats, folks, who are standing up for what Jefferson and Lincoln believed, what the abolitionists believed, what the Exodusters believed, and we're standing up as Americans and Democrats to move us forward because we believe it's so simple in the equality of every person in the sight of God. And you know what? I'll tell you something. It's not only right, it works. It works. I told you about Virginia's economic turnaround. Low income, 36th in median income to 12th in my lifetime. How'd we do it? North Dakota moved a long way. They discovered oil and gas. We didn't do it. We didn't discover anything underground. We discovered people's brains. Because in 1958, if you were African American, you couldn't go to a school with white kids. You couldn't go to an equally funded school. We didn't care about you and your talent. That New Testament phrase, the parable of the talents. Everybody gets talents. How do you use your talents? Virginia didn't care about the talents of kids if their skin colors were brown. You couldn't go to UVA if you were a woman, or many of our other colleges either. We didn't care about your talents. We weren't welcome to you if you were an immigrant. 1 out of 100 Virginians in 1958 was born in another country. And so how do we go from 36 to 12? We knocked down the walls and let African Americans and kids of all races learn together. We let women into all of our colleges. We're 1 out of 9 born in another country, not 1 out of 100. We suddenly decided we love talent. We'll grow our talent. We'll bring talent here. We'll recognize talent, celebrate talent, encourage talent, grow talent, attract the institutions that want to be around talent. I mean, what an amazing economic strategy. If you want to go from poor to rich, let people be all they can be. What a revolutionary idea. That's the only thing we did in Virginia. And it moved us from back of the pack to near front of the pack. Jefferson's equality principle isn't just moral and right and godly. It works. It works. And Democrats should never back off on it. Let me tell you something. Some still don't get it. I hear people on the other side, and even some Democrats, saying, the Democrats are too focused on political correctness. I hear them saying, why are the Democrats so focused on identity politics? If you ever hear somebody say that to you, enemy or friend, just say this: it's not about political correctness. It's not about identity politics. It's about equality. It was good enough for Thomas Jefferson. It's good enough for us. It was good enough for Abraham Lincoln. It's good enough for us. It was good enough for abolitionists. It's good enough for us. We are standing up for equality, and by doing so, we are standing up for the North Star that has defined, does define, and will define who we are as a nation. And if somebody gives you grief, say, what is it about equality that causes you such heartburn? Ask them that. Ask them that. That's what we're fighting for. Fighting for equality. We're fighting for equality. And what are we fighting against? Well, Charlottesville showed us what we have to fight against. I'm sorry we have to fight against it now. I thought we might grow beyond it. We have to fight against hatred and bigotry. The ralliers in Charlottesville, they said they were coming because of statues. And then they marched down the main street chanting blood and soil, a phrase from Hitler-era rallies in the 1930s. What does that have to do with the statue? Nothing. They chanted, Jews will not replace us. What does that have to do with the statue? Nothing. The guy who organized the rally is well known as a guy who says the South should have won the Civil War. It would be so much better if either we were divided as a nation or if we had continued to perpetrate the institution of slavery. They're against equality. The guy who organized the rally after the death of Heather Heyer, I'm sorry to say this, I don't really want to say it, but you got to know who these people are, tweeted out that she was a fat, disgusting communist. Hatred and bigotry. And we have to, as Democrats and as Americans, fight against hatred and bigotry with every ounce of the love that we have in our body and the energy that we have in our body. You got to fight against that mindset, and you have to fight against anybody that promotes it, and you have to fight against anybody that enables it. Now, thank goodness, look, it's only a small percentage of people who preach and hold these views with such bitterness. But the problem is they feel very emboldened today. They feel very emboldened today. And far too many people in this country and far too many people in politics are silent in the face of it. If there's one thing that history shows, it shows you cannot be an innocent bystander to hatred. You cannot be an innocent bystander to hatred. If you embrace equality, if you believe like Jefferson and Lincoln and the abolitionists and the exodusters that that's who we are as a nation, you got to stand up and battle against it. Sadly and unbelievably, we have a president who won't. Sadly and unbelievably, we've got a president that doesn't get the equality thing. It's interesting. Jefferson said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jefferson enumerated truths in the plural and put equality number one, but when Lincoln was at Gettysburg, he changed it. He said, whether a nation dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal can long survive. Jefferson sort of burned it all off and said, we are just dedicated to one thing in this country. And he said it on a battlefield that had been sanctified by bloodshed and the expiation of sin by both Northerners and Southerners. We are dedicated to one proposition, and we have been, but our president does not understand it. Even Republican Senator Bob Corker this week said our president doesn't have the competence and the character, but especially the understanding of what makes America great to enable him to be good as a president. We have a president who doesn't get equality. About African Americans, he said they're living in hell. He perpetrated the racist lie that President Obama was a United States citizen. He's trashed Muslims. He said you can treat women all kinds of horrible ways, and that's fine. He goes after immigrants, especially if they're Latinos. He goes after all kinds of people. And just yesterday, on a Friday, when you do the things that you're sort of ashamed of at the end of the day because the media cycle isn't so attentive, in the middle of a hurricane, so you'll get even less attention, he pardons a guy who had been convicted of targeted attacks against Latinos that were illegal, and he repeals a decision of the military to allow, if you meet the standards, the very tough standards to serve in the military, you can serve, and your sexual orientation, whether you're transgender, doesn't make a difference. He repealed it, even though the military leadership in recent hearings said they were fine with it. He repeals it. 2 anti-equality moves on one day. I guess that Hurricane Harvey stuff wasn't so time-consuming if he could take 2 anti-equality steps on one day. And I'll tell you another one that is personal and that shows something. When a young Somali in Columbus, Ohio, ran a car into a crowd of people in December, President-elect Trump called it terrorism, and he flew to Columbus to meet with those who had been injured in the attack. When a Muslim immigrant drove a car into a crowd on the Ramblas in Barcelona, President Trump called it terrorism and reached out to offer support to the government of Spain. But when a white supremacist drove his car and killed this beautiful 32-year-old and injured 19 people 90 miles from our national capital, the home of President Thomas Jefferson, he was suddenly all confused about what it was. Oh, there's violence on both sides. There's good people, many good people on both sides. And that family is still waiting to see if the president would reach out to them and express his horror about what happened. Well, look, guess what, folks? No matter how many, and this is something we have to be committed to, no matter how many white supremacists preach their hatred, whether it's in Virginia or anywhere else, and no matter what our president does to embolden them, we're not going back. America will not go back. We won't. No matter how many, and no matter what the president does, we are not going back. Look, we embrace in this room and in this country, you see it every day, we embrace equality. And we know the other path is a dead end. Because believe me, we've seen it in Virginia, where the first Africans came ashore in 1619, captured off Portuguese slave ships to Jamestown, slavery, Jim Crow, massive resistance, segregation in Virginia, in Kansas, all over this country. We've seen it, been there, done that, got the scar tissue. We are not going back. We're not going back. So let me just conclude. I sing a little bit in the church choir in my church, and we sing two great songs. One goes, since Missy sang, "We've come a long way, Lord, a mighty long way. We've come a long way, Lord, a mighty long way. We've borne our burdens in the heat of the day, but the Lord has made a way. We've come a long way, Lord, a mighty long way." Now, we can celebrate that we've come a long way, can't we? We can celebrate the gains that have been made, even in a painful time. It's good to remember, because it can inspire us. If we made those gains out of slavery and advances for women, advances for LGBT, and protections for dreamers, if we've made those gains, we ought to celebrate them. And we have come a mighty long way, getting closer to that North Star that we'll never reach, but that continues to be our North Star. And so often when we have, it's been Democrats who have made sure that we have, and have kept us focused on moving forward to that equality goal. But we're not there yet. We're not there yet. There's so much to do, and so many who are counting on us. There's always so many who are counting on us, but right now, right now, so many are counting on us. And so the other song that we sing in my church isn't about yesterday and where we've been. It's about where we're going. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching into freedom land. We've come a long way, but we got a long way to go. Kansas Democrats, are we going to let anybody turn us around? Are we going to keep on walking, keep on talking, keep on voting, keep on registering, keep on running for office, keep on marching? If we do those things, Free Staters, we will get to freedom land because of Democrats, because we stand for equality. Thank you for having me tonight. It's great to be with you.